that there was land waiting, we went running over here to Virginia, never once stopping to think, how is it that the British could own those land when there are already people on it? Well, that was the British. And of course, when they came into Manhattan, which at the time belonged to the Dutch, and it was called New Amsterdam, the British, of course, at that time, decided that that land belonged to them as well. So this was sort of the way the British did things. And the Scots-Irish people on my side were, of course, Scottish people. But again, the British were there saying, we have land for you in Ireland. Please come over and settle it. Never once stopping to think about the fact that they were displacing the Irish who were already there. But as we know, we solved that problem with the British a while later. Yes. My ancestor, Lady Rolette, came over to Pennsylvania. She settled with William Penn. She was from Wales. Lady Rolette came over as a lady of wealth or title. And when she arrived, she registered herself just like you would if you had a passport. And when she settled with William Penn, she had a lot of responsibilities. A lot of responsibilities that we don't really think about, because when we think about nobility, we think about people who are entitled, they're arrogant, they're a little bit too much for me, they're stuck up, this sort of thing. But in actuality, in those days, a woman of title had a lot of responsibilities. You honestly wouldn't want to be her because she worked. And if she had a well-run household, she worked even longer hours than the people who worked for her. Because one of her responsibilities was the health and welfare of everyone in her household. So literally, the lady of the house ran a small business. If she had employees, which they would have called servants, she was responsible for them. So imagine it, you have 50 employees, you're not only responsible for their pay and welfare, but you're their health insurance. The health insurance came from a lady's knowledge of plants. She had to know her herbs. And most of you that are sitting here at one time or another have heard the stories that have been passed down from your grandmother and your great-grandmother, and some of them have been referred to as old wives' tales. Well, at one time, the herb wife really did tell tales, but those tales were valid. And we're now finding out through the use of independent scientific confirmation that the stories that your ancestors told you in Ireland and in Scotland were actually valid. We're finding out that all of the things that you thought or you knew about that were handed on as poultices and teas have now been confirmed. When I was a child of the 60s, and I was a child of the 70s, the last thing that I wanted to do was listen to my mother's opinion on things. She was a person of the 50s, and she wore a skirt down to here. And of course, being in the 60s, I wanted to wear a mini skirt. I wanted to wear high heels. And I did not want to listen to her. I mean, really, you know, it was Southern California, and I was like, flower power! And my mother's response to that was, have a cup of chamomile tea, dear, and it will calm you down. And I'm like, you know, this kind of thing. So we had a culture shock. And I really didn't want to listen to the things that my mother was telling me, even though for hundreds of years, the herb wives and the nurses in my family, all of them, of course, because of Western medicine, most of them became nurses, including my mother. And because of that, I just didn't want to hear what they had to say. Now, most of you probably wouldn't. But here's the story. When we talk about history, we talk about all of the different things that have occurred. We talk about the mysteries. We talk about the different things that occur, but most of us, when we think of warriors and we think of some of the proud, valiant people that took over and the conquests and this sort of thing, what we forget about is how much they contributed to the practice of farming. Can you think of it that way? Well, you almost have to, because a lot of the plants that are now used here in the United States came over with settlers. And some of them actually came over with some of the meanest warriors on earth, the Hessians. Now, most of you know who the Hessians were. They were the German assassins that the British brought over to assassinate Americans. Well, those German Hessians carried in their little pouches their medicinal plants. So along with them, they brought things like chamomile. They brought chamomile because it was a sedative. They brought pain relievers. They brought all sorts of plants and plant knowledge because being the kind of men they were self-reliant. So herbs were not just something that was kept as a tradition among women, but herbs and plant knowledge was also kept and treasured by some of the most valiant people, some of the most strategically intelligent people, such as the British, or such as the Romans who came in and settled the Brits. So those Romans came traveling in and they brought all kinds of interesting plants. And they'd bring them from whatever region of the Roman Empire they came from. So one of the most reliable stories that we have on record is that of Achilles. And one of the reasons that he is the most interesting warrior is that his mother was actually documented as having been an herb wife. Now, she had a knowledge of these herbs. She had a knowledge that surpassed the common knowledge, which, of course, brought about legends about her. She must have been a goddess. She must have garnered this power. Well, we know as we're standing here that these sort of myths and this sort of mythology came about because if you were a person in those days and you were trying to garner political power or garner wealth or garner status, you would use what people most valued. And in those days, staying alive was something that they valued. Staying healthy was something that they valued. So what you found is most of the practitioners of herbal knowledge came through the religious route. So many of the Christian myths about rosemary, most of you have heard the story of Mary and the blue cloak, and most of you have probably heard about columbine, which was an ancient plant that's actually found in very ancient paintings from medieval times in the Garden of Eden. So these plants were garnered about by people such as the Druids. Now the Druids were actually protectors of knowledge. One of the things that they did as the first early scientists was to watch the solstice. And why would they watch the solstice? Well, a lot of people who really didn't understand what was going on with plants thought that, well, it was because they worshiped the stars. Well, who knows? But what we do know for a fact is that by watching the summer solstice and the winter solstice, they were able to guide the people in the right direction when it came to planting. How many of you have ever heard plant by the light of the moon? A couple of people. Well, in the winter solstice, if you're watching the shadows, you can actually know where to avoid planting because you don't want to plant your plants in the springtime in the shade. So the winter solstice was something you remember, not so much for celebration as it was to pass on the cultural knowledge. And summer solstice, why would you want to know that? Because there are certain plants that you might not want to eat after the summer solstice. Because in those days, we didn't have all the fancy Western knowledge that would protect us from those kind of diseases or fungus and things like that. So all of this knowledge was kept as a sort of tradition. And a lot of people think of it as sort of a religious or philosophical practice. When in fact, in Ireland, we found some of the most advanced group of people as an agrarian society. The Irish were indeed one of the very advanced societies when it came to understanding agriculture. They were ahead of the game. And this seems ironic now, but at the time, they did very well. And one of the reasons was because they understood that the earth was always spinning, that something was always changing up there. And when you go throughout the British Isles, especially in Ireland and Scotland, you see these groups of stones. And really, you can associate them with magic, or you can associate them with the practical reason that they were there. And that was to observe where the shadows fell. Observe the best planting days. Observe the best time. And this was important because you had to feed people. So feeding people was an important part of the early days. When I think of Ireland, I don't think of green isles. I think of blue, lovely blue cornflowers and campanula bellflowers and heath and blue fleabane and bog orchids and pennywort. There are 900 species of native plants in Burin Island. Have any of you been to Burin?
Yes.
So you know about the karst that's there. And it's very similar to the karst that's here in our mountains. Now, when you think of all the beautiful parts of Ireland, it would never occur to you that some of the plants that we now consider weeds in our yard are actually becoming endangered there. So among these 900 species, they're having endangered plants. Well, these plants that are becoming endangered, that people are now looking at as weeds, are actually plants that hold great medicinal value. And this is important because we're finding that most of the native plants that we have growing in our yards that we consider to be weeds are actually important. That for centuries and thousands of years, these plants have actually existed as a way to keep people healthy and fit. Now, I don't know what all of you were doing on 9/11, but I can tell you what I did. My husband called me up. He told me about the event on the news. So I had to turn the TV on. I saw what was happening. He wouldn't tell me over the phone. He just said, go turn the TV on. Turn it on now. So I did. And when I did, of course, my first reaction was to drive down to the public school, make sure that they hadn't done anything with my son that they didn't want to tell me about yet. You know, make sure everything, I was on the PTA, so I had more secrets than I cared to tell. And so I drove down there, and I went to my son, and I gave him a hug and a kiss, and I said, listen, I said, this is just the actions of a few. This is not the actions of a many. And you're going to stay here. I'm going to leave you here because I wanted him to have confidence in the American system. I wanted him to believe that this country would take care of this problem and that we would be successful. And again, my second reason was I wanted him to grow up as a brave young man because this is the home of the brave. And we do take care of ourselves, whether we're Irish or Scottish, but that's the American way. So I left him there, but I can tell you, my feeling was to grab him up and just head him into a bunker. That was really what I wanted to do. But these are the things that we think about. Now, when I went home, on my way home, having taken care of that, the second thing I thought about was, wow, what if all these people need hospitals? What are they all going to do? Then all of a sudden, as I'm driving along, I'm like, wow, you know, there's only like 2 hospitals here, and I'm thinking all this because having been the daughter of a couple of nurses and grandmothers and herb wives, these kind of things come to mind. So as I got home, and this was my poor husband, when he came home that night, he found a pile of plants in the middle of his lawn. And he came up and he's like, what is that in the middle of my lawn? What did you put there? And I said, well, I put some native plants in there. And he's like, what's a native plant? And I said, well, these are some plants that my grandmother and my aunt and my mother had all taught me would help us if we got sick. And he goes, I'm not gonna, what are you talking about? And here we have it. The nature of medicine has changed because we really weren't the Wild West.